Today's episode is brought to you by the sounds of children playing, which, if you don't understand the context, is actually a pretty terrifying sound. Have you ever just listened to children playing and screaming and having fun and thought, those could be murder screams? You really don't know. In fact, we just kind of assume, maybe they are murder screams sometimes. We just assume that, oh no, the kids are having fun. But they sound like little howling banshees. Can you imagine if human children didn't make that sound? Like, what if human children just squeaked? Like other little mammals do. Just make little squeaking sounds. And so you lived in this universe in which small children just squeak at each other. And one day you were just walking in the woods or whatever, and you, off in the distance, heard these murder scream sounds. Can you even imagine what would go through your head in that moment? That would have to be as terrifying as like the first time somebody heard parrots talking and just didn't know where that sound was coming from or what the hell it was. In fact, you know what? That's my new theory. That's my headcanon, is that all ghost stories are just like legends from a time when people didn't know parrots talked. And they just were walking through the jungle and they heard parrots talking and they just freaked out, because that's exactly what I would do. Because parrots also, if you don't know that that's how parrots sound, if you just heard that sounds like some sort of like horrific mockery of a human voice, like something that had its soul ripped out and is just like wandering adrift through the ether. So I think about these things a lot. Yeah. On today's episode of Good Design, Bad Design, we're going to take a look at extremely large blasters and figure out the proper way to handle them. Because a lot of these blasters really aren't designed very well, especially for the kids that they're intended for. A great example of a terrible design is the Judge. So what you've got here is an extremely large ammo system that sits very far forward, and the grip is at the very bottom. It's unstable because it's got a high center of gravity, and the portion up here sits ahead of where your hand is going to be. So it's constantly nose heavy and top heavy, and this is just the worst possible thing you could design for something like this, especially if this is intended to be held by an 8-year-old. I don't know what's going on at Hasbro, but rational thought is not it. So this is just bad. We got to figure out what to do about this. Now, if you use this in Judicator mode, which I talk about in another video, where you hold it here and then use this as a shoulder stock and grip it from here, this actually works quite well. And you can sit here all day without getting too tired, because you are now supporting the top half here, and it's not all resting on the bottom hand. But this isn't a traditional method of holding a blaster, and without some trigger remapping and whatnot, this is not exactly how you'd want to do it. So let's figure out what to do if you want to hold a blaster the traditional way and not have to worry about all this nonsense. So the straightforward solution is, instead of having the blaster be top heavy, you want all the weight to hang underneath. So the Mastadon is a great example of that. It's actually kind of an okay example of that. There are other good examples, but they're over there and I don't want to get up. So Mastadon it is. The Mastadon is a good design in the sense that all of the weight hangs underneath the front carry grip. So this isn't exactly a carry handle. This is just sort of like a grip far forward. And this does solve the problem and allows everything to just kind of hang down there at the side. But it's sitting way higher than the primary hand grip. So what that does is it creates this really weird situation where you're either kind of like pulling it back like this in order to shoot, and that really creates some discomfort, especially in your biceps and triceps. It just moves your elbow in a really weird way to sit here like this. Or you have to go like full Team Fortress 2 heavy style and lock your elbow and hold it straight out. And that creates a whole different problem. You're hyperextending your elbow, and you're not going to be able to comfortably do that for very long. You're going to have to constantly adjust, and you're going back and forth between like a carrying mode and a firing mode. and that just isn't really good for fast engagements and that sort of thing, especially with the spin-up time on a flywheel like this. So how do we solve this problem? Well, the thing is that there's no existing solution for this. This is overall a good design. It's not bad by any means, but we can make it better. So the simple way to make this better would be to move this grip so that it's up here, so that the grip, instead of sitting down here in line with the body of the blaster, sits above the blaster in line with the front carry grip. So I would think the best way to do this would be to actually create a carry handle, and the back of the carry handle is kind of like a 45-degree, sort of like a rifle style grip with the trigger on it. So everything just kind of hangs below there, and it actually helps to bring the two hands closer together. You can swivel the weapon more easily, and you don't have to stretch your arm way out there in order to make it work. And it turns out that even though that design doesn't exist, something similar exists, in the sense that the Rhino Fire, for all of its flaws, has a nicely angled main grip back here, and then it's got this small but surprisingly useful and comfortable forward carry grip, and they sit almost on the same axis. They sit almost in line with each other. So this blaster is surprisingly easy to use for long periods of time, even with two big 35s hanging off of it or whatever else, because one arm is not significantly elevated above the other. So maybe when I put this together, it'll turn out that there's a very good reason they don't do that with both hands sitting on a level above the main blaster. Maybe that is just ergonomically terrible. I won't know until I try it, but I'd say it's worth a try. So thank you again for hanging around for this episode of Good Design, Bad Design.